those people know who he is. Congressman Peter Welch.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll maybe stand out here. Yeah. Thank you very much. You know, the early song was really quite beautiful. The birthday song. let me put it.
Turned on, sir.
I think so.
You have the second one. Sorry. Yeah, you are. Okay.
Yeah. The second one, your birthday song. I'll put it this way: you sing like we legislate. It's pretty bad, I'll tell you.
Let me see where your microphones are.
All right, we're going to do a mic check here,
Sorry,
make
no,
sure everything is okay.
I think they're too close together, sir.
What network is this?
One is for WBTN, the other is CAT TV. Okay, now try, please. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Well, first of all, it's really delightful to be here. And Mary Morrissey and I had a wonderful visit at the Veterans Home, and what a magnificent institution. And it's just moving to be in the presence of the dedicated staff who, it reminds me of the person talking about the teachers. You know, the staff who, they show up for work every day with a bounce in their step wanting to serve these veterans. And then the veterans and their stories from World War II to Vietnam. We met one man who sits in his wheelchair outside all of the time, and he actually was on the scene when our soldiers first came into a concentration camp in Germany. And you know, it just reminds you, not just of the service, but of our history as a country. So it was just, Mary, thank you for helping arrange that. It was a very moving experience for me. The second thing I want to say is I love your four-way test. And I really do. It's just, you know, I've been in Congress 11 years now, and it's been good times and not so good times. The good times are always when there's a consensus among the people who are there that the job is to get something done. And getting something done is not whether it's to your advantage. It's the four-way test. Is it going to be good for all? And that allows you to step back and have some humility, where it's not just about prevailing on your point of view. It's about having a fundamental commitment to having, at the end of the day, an understanding you've taken a step forward. And we're kind of stalled in Congress now. And that is really, really unacceptable to the American people, because our job in Congress in many ways is very, very simple, even if the issues sometimes are complex. Our job is to pass public policy that allow you back home to be successful in doing your work. That's really what it's about. And there's nobody who ever has a right answer. You know, it's a process that you've got to go through where, I'll take healthcare as an example. We passed a healthcare bill. I think it improved the status quo, but it needs changes, all right? What we've been arguing about the past several years is whether to just repeal everything we've done rather than improve it. And the big area in healthcare that needs improvement is we've got to get the cost down. And when we've just been locked in this debate where it's an all or nothing situation, and we voted like 65 times to repeal healthcare, and then there's no replacement, and we get back and you're seeing what's happening in Washington now, where we're continuing this debate on healthcare, but there's not even a concrete alternative that's out there as to what we will replace it with. You know, that's the aspect of what's going on now that I find very alarming, because in leadership, if you're going to have a policy, you've got to have something that's specific, that people can react to, whether it's in healthcare or there's a lot of interest in trying to get tax reform, but you've got to give that some definition. You know, what does it really mean, so that I can react to it, so I can explain it to you, so you can react to it. And we're just bouncing from topic to topic without coming together to have a roll up the sleeves kind of conversation about, all right, what are the steps that we can take to move us a step forward? Now, there is some hope. You know, one part, because this is an example of the way I think we should be working. In the Affordable Care Act, there's one component of it that is called the individual market. Some of you may be in it, but probably most of you aren't. The individual market is for about 7 to 9% of Americans, and it's about 7 to 9% of Vermonters. And they buy directly from an insurance company, and depending on their income, they get subsidies. Well, it's broken. And a number of us on the Democratic side are willing to acknowledge that a part of the Affordable Care Act is not working. Let's fix it. I mean, what major endeavor, whether it's running your school or running your local business or raising your kids, you make a decision, but then you adjust based on what's happening, right? You take a look at it. This part's working, let's do more. This part needs adjustment, let's fix it. So we could address that. And in the Senate, Senator Alexander, who's a former governor and very practical person from Tennessee, Republican, is working with Senator Murray, a Democrat, from Washington, and they've identified the problem and they've proposed a concrete solution. And there's 40 of us in the House, 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans, who got together because we're both sides fed up with just the standoff, right? And we've advocated for the same fix to the individual market that we have being proposed by Senator Alexander and Senator Murray. And then we've had governors, bipartisan governors, including our own Governor Scott, signing on a letter, some Democrats, some Republicans, to us in Congress saying, hey, look, let's do the Alexander Murray fix. You know, this makes sense. So that's an example of how if you try to work together in a concrete way, not just talk in rhetoric and ideology, but individual market, what are the problems with it, and address them concretely, then you can make progress. And my hope is that we can ultimately be successful in making this reform, admittedly as to a small part of the Affordable Care Act. But in my view, we've got to break the fever. And the fever is we're just sort of shouting back and forth at each other without making any concrete progress to start solving problems. And we can do it. But what I'm inspired by these days, because some people ask me, Peter, how do you do it? But, you know, Mary and I served in the State House. I've been in Congress 11 years now. And it's tougher now because we're just not having that ability to work together that you need in a legislative body. And we've got to get back to it. And my conviction is that we've got to bring more of a Vermont way of doing business to Washington in order to start making progress. And I'm seeing a number of my Republican colleagues who share that point of view. And that's this 40-person group, 20 Republicans, 20 Democrats that we're calling the problem solvers. They just know that bottom line, when we come home, we've got to be able to report some progress or some substantial effort to make progress to the people that we work for. And I work for you. So that's the mission, that's the challenge. But what does inspire me while we're trying to find our way in Washington is it's extraordinary what's happening back here at home with good people like you in this room. What's going on at Head Start, taking care of those kids. What's going on at the Veterans Administration, where people show up for work. It's not like they're getting rich by any means, but they've got to bounce in their step because they're making a difference in the lives of these people who've made such a sacrifice for us. Where I see some of these folks, I was at an event up in Burlington where some of our folks who are involved in the farm to school and the school nutrition programs are just teaching kids about good nutrition and introducing them to food that's healthy and tasty, right? And that's a challenge, but they take it on. And I believe that in order for us in Washington to start being more helpful to folks here at home, the biggest challenge we face is recognizing on both sides that we really have to work together. Now, I've always known that instinctively. Again, I go back to my early time in the legislature here in Montpelier. But we have a wonderful ethic here in Vermont that we've got to hang on to. You know, when I was the Senate president, one of the senators, I was a Democrat, Phil Scott was a member of the Senate at that time. And I played, as Senate president, I played a major role in who was the chair of various committees. And we made Governor Scott then senators got the chair of the Institutions Committee. It's a big money committee, important committee. When I tell that to my colleagues in Washington, they think I literally need to have a mental status exam, right? Why would you appoint somebody from the other party? And then they say, oh, you're a nice guy. It has nothing to do with being a nice guy. It has to do with getting something done. You know, Phil was the right person for that job. He had a real seat at the table. And the Republicans at that time in the minority had a seat at the table and worked together. So it's about getting things done. It's not about being a nice person or not. It's just what you need to do in order to make progress. So I'm finding myself focusing as much in the Congress right now about trying to fix the process, trying to create some trust among people who don't see eye to eye and come from different parts of the country where they see it differently. Because unless we get that process to work, then whatever the issue, healthcare, tax reform, the environment, we're not going to be able to make progress on that. And it's tough with this president because things change so much in terms of what the daily focus is. And that's a challenge because anybody who's running an organization, works in a business, raises a family, you've got to have an idea what you're trying to do, and then you've got to commit to it, and you've got to sustain it day in and day out. You've got to have some constancy of purpose, okay? And you also have to have the ability to be flexible because your best laid plans sometimes don't work out, and that requires enough modesty, enough humility really to step back and say, hey, this isn't working. There's no harm in that when we're just direct about it, when you're responding to reality. But if it's just ideology and you impose that irrespective of what the facts are, ultimately that's going to lead to failure and conflict. So people ask me, do I like my job? I do like my job. I don't like the times we're in because I think we've got to get our democracy functioning better. And I think it's dangerous when the Congress in Washington is not able to take constructive steps on these major policy questions that have to be addressed. So that's a challenge, and I have to acknowledge that very candidly. But it's still such a wonderful state to represent where we've got here in the state a lot of folks, whether they're in Rotary or not, living by the four-way test. So thank you for what you do, and I'm going to continue doing everything I can to try to restore some Vermont way of doing business to the United States Congress. Thank you. Open up for questions.
Sure, we have quite a bit of time for questions.
Congressman, let me start off with this, and maybe it will lead to a lot of conversation, this discussion from you, comments from you. I'm 74 years old. I have no children, therefore no grandchildren, and I don't have that much longer to hang around. But I'm concerned that with the current administration and the current money in politics, blah, 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 our democracy is not going to survive. Could you give me some good feeling that maybe it will?
Well, first of all, I've got to acknowledge that there's a legitimate basis for your concern, all right? There's two things in politics that have gotten really totally out of hand. One is the money, and the other is the gerrymandering. You know, these districts in Congress are designed for the benefit of the politicians and the parties. And what you have oftentimes are districts that are designed so that only somebody on the far right on the Republican side or somebody on the far left on the Democratic side can win. And what happens there is that the person who's elected, it's not so important to me that they're liberal or conservative. Do they want to govern? And if it's an extreme person, then they're the folks who are saying, hey, let's shut the government down, let's default on our debt, let's do these things that really are just very destructive. So you've got to get you can work with a conservative or a liberal. I mean, the people in this Rotary have a lot of different political views, but you come together when you decide as a group you want to accomplish something for a project. So I think the gerrymandering's got to be changed, and it could be. A lot of states are starting to go, I mean, we don't have this issue in Vermont, but a lot of states are going to having independent commissions design the district, so it's got more integrity to it. The second thing is the money. Citizens United has been a real problem. Do you remember, I don't know how many remember my first race. It was in 2006, and it was when Senator Jeffords retired. So it was an open seat in Vermont, and it's a big deal for both parties to try to win that seat. Okay, it really is. My opponent was an extraordinarily competent person and very much respected. It was Martha Rainville, all right? She was the Adjutant General of our National Guard. And it was a real jump ball as to who was going to win that race, okay? And in fact, she was, I think, ahead for quite a while until the end. It was a Democratic year, and I think that helped push me over the top. But what was significant in that race is Martha and I early on sat down, had a cup of coffee, we had a discussion, and we both said, hey, we don't want to run negative ads. And we shook hands, and neither of us in the whole race ran a negative ad. And we in Vermont ran the only contested race for Congress in the entire country where there was not a single negative ad, right? People like that. She kept her word, I kept my word. If Martha and I were running against each other now, we couldn't enforce that agreement. She could make certain her campaign funds didn't spend money on negative, and I could do that. But these outside forces, where these billionaires are now playing a big role in politics, and where they literally have political advisors, and they sit around looking over the map of the House races and the Senate races, and they say, hey, Vermont looks good for me. I mean, and this might be a billionaire who lives in Wyoming, right, and could care less about Vermont, but sees that if she can prop up a candidate who's going to support their view on climate change or whatever the issue is. So that's what's happened since Citizens United. So I think that the two most important things to give democracy a boost and to give everyday people more strength is to have nonpartisan district lines and really curtail gerrymandering, and second, to overturn Citizens United. But we've got to hang in. But those are the two things I would say.
You want to comment a little bit on some of the particulars of the Alexander Murray legislation?
Yeah, I can. The individual market is where its individuals are buying their policies directly from insurance companies. And in order for those policies to be sold, when I'm an individual, the amount I have to pay for my premium is based on my income, okay? And one of the ways that if I'm lower income, I get an affordable policy is the government makes payments to the insurance companies called cost sharing reductions, okay? And what that means is that the insurance company can basically lower my co-pays and deductibles so it makes my policy affordable. The president, there's a legal case as to whether or not the way we design that requires a legislative appropriation or it can be administered by the executive. The president has taken the position that he's not going to allow these cost-sharing reductions to continue unless the court says it's okay. So I don't have a big problem with him doing that. Where I have a problem is that it's up to Congress could fix that. In other words, if there's a legal question, there's an available answer, and that is to pass a law that makes it clear. So, as you know, there's a lot of folks, and the president is among them, who wants to repeal or just unravel the Affordable Care Act. So he's stopping these payments. And what that means is two things. One, if the insurance companies aren't getting this that really benefit the individual, then people in the low-income side are going to get a higher premium support, so it's going to cost the taxpayers more money. People just at that cutoff line, and it always works this way, you know, you're working some, and you're going to lose, and they're going to be priced out of being able to get any insurance. So the Alexander Murray and the problem solvers approach is, number one, to guarantee that the cost-sharing reductions continue. Number two, to continue the advertising and marketing for enrollment in the health care plan. And that's a basic proposition of insurance. The more people you have in the pool, the more you spread the risk and the lower the cost is overall, all right? So those are the two important elements of our plan. And it's acknowledged by the Congressional Budget Office that if we did what Alexander Murray and the problem solvers are proposing, it would actually bring the deficit down, or not, because it would keep the insurance roll stable. So it's a fix to about 7 to 9% of the market, but for those 7 to 9%, it's 100% of the problem. So to some extent, just by my answer, you can see you're getting into the weeds and getting technical, but that's our job. You know what I mean? That's our job. So that would work. And what I do like about working with my Republican colleagues and the problem solvers is that we're both making an acknowledgement. The Democrats, who of course were the main advocates for the Affordable Care Act, are acknowledging that there's some things that aren't working that well. And my Republican colleagues, who've been voting over and over to repeal it, are acknowledging there are some good things in the Affordable Care Act. Like, people really do want to be able to get insurance, whether they have a pre-existing condition. I can't tell you how many parents I've met in Vermont who are so relieved that their kids can stay on their policy till age 26. They get out of high school, they get out of college, that interim period, they're getting jobs where oftentimes the wages aren't that great. They're getting started, and the parent has the security to know that their kids got health care coverage. And then the lifetime caps. If you're unlucky and you have a chronic condition and it's not anything you can control, you're going to continue to incur medical expenses. In the old days, you'd be thrown off at a certain point. And so there's some really good things there, but there are some things that need to be fixed.
Yes, sir.
I'll take Susan next, and then I'll come to that side of the
The box here.
Just briefly, I don't know if you can comment on this or not. I'm 75. Since I was 20 when I read Silent Spring, I have been very liberal in my political ideas and my philosophies and things, and I've never felt as despondent and as full of despair as I am right now, because and it's like a malaise. I don't have happiness, I don't have optimism, and I'm a really happy person. Most people know me to be that way. I'm very distressed, depressed, and sad about about our situation in the world, our situation in the country, and I look at my friends, and I know that we're all suffering from one thing or another, and I don't see any way out of it. And I'm sorry, I just don't know what we can do to get things back together. Both presidents, both ex-presidents are talking about what's going on.
Right.
I don't know what we can do.
Right. Well, I'm not going to argue with you, okay? Because I feel, as I travel around, people are concerned that there's like no guardrails. In the past, it might be the Republican one, it might be the Democrat one, but you had a sense that they were going to operate within certain lanes of travel, okay? And you could always count on expressions of respect for people that you disagreed with. And in fact, that's a major responsibility that our president has. Or just think about it, the chair of a local select board. Major responsibility a person has is to create space for the dialogue and the debate. And so I think what you just said, I hear many other really good people who've been involved and lived through the ups and downs of political defeats and victories, local or national, and they just keep moving ahead, but there's some doubt as to whether those basic guardrails of democracy are there, and I think they're under stress. And so I want to be candid in acknowledging that. And it's why so much of what I'm doing now in my time is trying to reach out to Republicans. When I first ran for office, I was talking about health care. I was talking about the Iraq War at that time. I was talking about the environment. Things that were really important to me, I think really important to Vermonters. Now, the situation we're in, we've got to make this Congress work in order to have any chance of being successful on progress on any of these issues. So that's the big challenge. Now, what I say, just to motivate myself, we don't decide what the times are like we decide whether we're going to engage in what those times require. Okay, so when President Obama got elected, I was pretty excited about that. Okay, and we went down to Congress, and there was a lot of positive things that I thought we could do, and we worked on it. It's a bit different now, and it's a different challenge. But what motivates me is every day I get up and I have an opportunity, uphill battle that it may be, to go over to that Capitol to vote in ways that I think make sense and hope you do, and also to try to create some movement towards a more productive Congress. Admittedly uphill, and none of us ever know in whatever our activity is whether we'll be successful. You know, you're a teacher in a school. You're starting out with that 5th grade class. You don't know how that's going to turn out. You have some experience that tells you that tough as it is on that first day, it'll probably be okay. But you just got to plunge ahead and do it. And that's what I think is the truth for all of us. And what I do believe is that a lot of the good leadership now is coming from our local communities and our state communities. It's local organizations. It's local companies. A lot of the good work on the environment now is many of our companies are recognizing that they have to contribute to reducing carbon emissions. They also are totally into energy efficiency. So whatever the politics are swirling around, there's a lot of local actors, and it can be us as individuals, who just say, what can I do where I am to make a difference? And embrace that. That's important to do. It's why the projects you do, you know, it's not going to save the world, but it's going to make a better world, right? And that's good. Just keep at it. We can't allow ourselves to be discouraged. That's how I feel. And I'm in the swamp, right? So.
I just wanted to follow up, Congressman. One of the things that I'm very happy to do is to call senators' offices and your office. But what astonished me when I first started wanting to voice my opinion was going to the website for congressional committees. And many of the congressional committees, because that's the people who are working on the issues, so you want your voice to be heard there. And many of them have a contact number. But there are a number of them who say, right on the website, if you're a Democrat, contact this person. If you're a Republican, this person, and that's it. That is not helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you know, if you want to make progress and persuade people, you don't just talk to the people that agree with you. So you're correct on that.
It's not good. Jerry?
During the last election, I voted Libertarian. And the reason why I voted Libertarian is because I didn't want to vote against somebody so the other would win or vice versa. I wanted to vote for something positive. And the positive thing that I can see is a three-party system. But unilaterally, the Democrats and the Republicans block that idea whenever they can. Why is that?
You know, the access to the ballot is much more state by state, and you know, some states it's much harder. Like New York State, it's very hard to get on the ballot. Vermont, it's pretty easy. Okay, so it is a state by state answer. There's not a national Democratic Party position or ability to stop a third-party person from running. I mean, look what Bernie did. I mean, he's an independent, but he parked himself in the Democratic Party to run for president and did pretty well. He did pretty well. So I think that's a state issue, and it has historic reasons in each of the states. Now, what's happening, by the way, in many, you know, Trump was kind of a third-party person. I mean, well, no, I mean, I'm saying that's true. That whole thing is breaking down. The parties are not particularly respected. Okay, they don't have the ability to deliver like they used to. And Donald Trump used to be a Democrat. At least that's what I read. And it's not like he was the favorite of the Republican Party. He was kind of a hostile takeover. That's what most people think. So it was his success, and to some extent Bernie's, was, I think, a reflection of a lot of discontent among the American people that things weren't working. And obviously Donald Trump had one set of prescriptions and Bernie had quite the opposite. And I'm much more sympathetic to Bernie's prescriptions than President Trump's. But you voting Libertarian, I think, is an expression of the frustration that a lot of people have with the way things are going.
So we'll take Ted and then Vicki, and we're coming to close.
Okay.
So.
I think Jerry might have been addressing the fact that in 2016, the Libertarian Party was able to get on the ballot in every single state.
Right.
However, if the Libertarian candidate isn't in the debates, he's dead.
That's true, and of course, you know, the press sort of controls that, and they and I don't know what the rules are in that. You have to be, the way they set it up, you have to have reach some polling percentage. So I mean, I don't think we ought to be making it accessible as much as we can. I agree with that, but there's got to be some standards so that you don't have 35 people standing up for a final presidential debate. Kind of gets winnowed down in the primaries. Yes.
Because I'm an eternal optimist, I would like to ask you, do you feel that the Problem Solvers group with the 40 congressmen, is that an encouragement to you? Do you feel like you can gain momentum and get real change?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. The answer is yes, all right? It really is heartening to me to be with a group, and it reminds me a little bit, Mary, of Montpelier, because we would sit down in Montpelier with Republicans and Democrats. We do it at lunch or we do it in the committee, and we'd have a talk about a problem and we try to make a little bit of progress. And that's the way, I mean, look, I'm saying that like it's a big deal. That's like what our job is, right? So we ought to be doing that just every day. The problem we have right now is that in the Republican majority in the House is operating on a self-imposed rule where they basically won't put a piece of legislation on the floor unless they can pass it with Republican votes only, all right? Now, what happens when that happens, okay? It means that as you're trying to get up to 218 on a bill, that's the number we need, and there's some holdouts. The holdouts, and that's generally the most conservative wing of the Republican Party, make demands, and that legislation moves farther and farther to the right. If Paul Ryan abandoned that approach, and instead of negotiating to get those last 20 or 30 votes from the most extreme wing of his party, came to Democrats and said, hey, you know, can we get this budget passed? Can we pass this reform on the individual health care market? You'd have a whole different scene. A totally different scene. So that has got us in handcuffs there. And it's the biggest impediment to progress. You know, John Boehner, who I thought was a good speaker, several times abandoned that rule. It was called the Hastert rule, but they stopped calling it that after he went to jail, you know. So, but the point is, on things that were really essential to the well-being of the country, like the budget and paying our bills instead of defaulting, he came to Nancy Pelosi, all right, and the Democrats, and we wanted to keep the lights on in government. We wanted to pay our bills. And if Ryan would do that, we could start making progress. The challenge for him is that many within his caucus would abandon him if he did it. But you can't operate where it's an all or nothing by one party. It just doesn't work. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.